President Trump is threatening to send the U.S. military to Nigeria to stop the slaughter of Christians. The Islamic terror groups have been targeting Christian communities there for decades.
After first denying the problem, the Nigerian government now says it would welcome U.S. help in fighting Muslim insurgents killing Christians, as long as its territorial integrity is respected. This after President Trump warned on Truth Social the U.S. military stands prepared to go into Nigeria guns a-blazing, claiming the country's government is allowing Christians to be slaughtered, and adding the Nigerian government better move fast.
On Nigeria, just wanted to ask you, do you envisage US boots on the ground?
Could be. I mean, a lot of things I envisage, a lot of things. They're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria. And they have other countries very bad also. You know that.
All right. So picture this. You're the president of the United States. You've got the nuclear codes, the entire military at your fingertips, and you're supposed to be the most powerful person on the planet, right? And yet, here we are in November 2025, and the top military brass, the generals and admirals who are supposed to salute and follow orders, are basically standing there in dead silence while the commander-in-chief speaks. No applause, no nods, just awkward, uncomfortable silence. And that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part is what happened behind closed doors, because according to multiple reports that just leaked, President Trump absolutely lost it in the Oval Office. We're talking a full meltdown. And the target of that meltdown? His own Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. Yeah, the guy Trump personally picked to run the Pentagon. And now military leaders who usually stay quiet are finally speaking out about what they're seeing. This is wild, you guys. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
It's of the number of Christians killed in Nigeria from Muslim extremist groups and sectarian violence since 2009 are in the tens of thousands. Some claim it exceeds 100,000. Nigeria is split nearly equally between Muslims and Christians. But over the last decade, the violent terror group Boko Haram and other extremists have increased attacks in northern Nigeria.
So here's what we know. There was this Signal group chat, right? You know, one of those encrypted messaging apps that people use when they don't want their conversations leaked. Well, guess what happened? It leaked. And not just any chat. This was a group chat with some of the most senior officials in Trump's national security team. We're talking about discussions involving military operations in Yemen, classified information, the kind of stuff that if you or I leaked it, we'd be in handcuffs before lunch. But here's where it gets interesting. When active duty military officers leak classified info, they get court-martialed. They lose their careers. Some go to prison. Remember Reality Winner? She leaked one document to the press and got 5 years in federal prison. But when it's people at the very top in the Trump administration, suddenly it's just a mistake, an oopsie. Come on. The Atlantic broke the story about this Signal chat leak, and it sent shockwaves through Washington. Military veterans started speaking out, saying there's a massive double standard here. One retired officer put it bluntly, saying that active duty officers would be fired and prosecuted for far less than what just happened with this group chat. But Pete Hegseth, he gets chewed out in the Oval Office and then goes right back to work. And speaking of that Oval Office meeting, let's talk about what actually went down. According to Yahoo News, Hegseth himself admitted that Trump absolutely tore into him. We're talking a classic Trump tirade, the kind where he's pacing, pointing, probably going red in the face. And why? Because the optics are terrible. Because it makes the administration look incompetent, because when your defense secretary's private chats about military operations end up in the Atlantic, it's not exactly a good look for national security. But Trump's response to all this tells you everything you need about where his head is at. Instead of taking responsibility, instead of saying, yeah, we messed up, we'll fix our security protocols, Trump went on the offensive. He started talking about how military leaders are leaking information to sabotage his agenda. He fired high-ranking officers, accusing them of being disloyal. He's basically purging the Pentagon of anyone he thinks isn't 100% on board with his vision. And that brings us to that moment I mentioned earlier, that dead silence. Because just days after all this drama exploded, Trump held this big gathering with military leaders. The photos and videos that came out of that event are honestly kind of stunning. You've got dozens of decorated generals and admirals, people with decades of service, standing there looking absolutely miserable. Some reports described them as looking ashamed and stunned. And when Trump finished speaking, nothing. No applause, just uncomfortable silence. Reuters described the scene as a mix of fear, praise, and silence. Some people clapped because they felt they had to, but a lot of the top brass just stood there. And that image, those videos, they went viral. People on social media were sharing clips saying, "Look at these generals. They can't even pretend to support this guy anymore." Now here's why this matters. Right now, today, we're literally days away from crucial elections. The government is in the middle of what's being called a record-breaking shutdown. Trump's approval ratings are shaky. Military families, who have historically leaned Republican, are watching all of this unfold. And what they're seeing is chaos. They're seeing a president at war with his own defense secretary. They're seeing leaked classified chats. They're seeing military leaders who look like they'd rather be anywhere else. This isn't just palace intrigue. This isn't just Washington drama. This is about who controls the most powerful military on earth. And right now, it looks like nobody's really in control. The Pentagon is in turmoil. The chain of command seems broken. Trust between civilian leadership and military brass is at an all-time low. And in the middle of all this, we've got actual international crises brewing, a government shutdown that's affecting millions of Americans, and elections that could reshape the entire political landscape. So buckle up, because we're about to break down exactly how we got here, why it's even worse than it looks, and what it means for what comes next. Because trust me, once you see the full picture, you'll understand why military leaders are finally breaking their silence, and why that silence in that room was louder than any words they could have spoken. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Because to understand why this Oval Office meltdown matters, you need to understand the bigger pattern here. And trust me, once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Pete Hegseth wasn't supposed to be defense secretary. Like, he wasn't on anybody's shortlist for the job. The guy was a Fox News host. Yeah, he's a military veteran. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and nobody's questioning his personal service. But running the entire Department of Defense, that's a different beast entirely. You're talking about managing millions of personnel, a budget bigger than most countries' entire economies, and coordinating military operations across the entire globe. But Trump picked him anyway. Why? Because Hegseth was loyal. Because he went on Fox News every week and defended Trump no matter what. Because he wasn't part of the traditional military establishment that Trump has been at war with since his first term. And that loyalty, that willingness to go along with whatever Trump wants, that's been the main qualification for pretty much every major appointment in this administration. Now here's where things get complicated. Because when you prioritize loyalty over competence, over experience, over actual qualifications, you get situations exactly like this signal chat disaster. You get people who don't know how to handle classified information properly. You get security protocols that are basically held together with duct tape and hope. And eventually, inevitably, something leaks. And boy did it leak. The Atlantic's report detailed conversations about military operations in Yemen. We're talking about active combat zones, real-time intelligence, the kind of information that if it falls into the wrong hands could literally get people killed. And it was just sitting there in a group chat on an app with who knows how many people having access to it. Military.com reported that this whole mess led to even more infighting within Trump's circle. Because once the leak happened, everyone started pointing fingers. Who leaked it to the Atlantic? Was it someone inside the group chat? Was it someone who hacked the app? Was it a disgruntled Pentagon official who wanted to embarrass Hegseth? Nobody knows for sure, but the paranoia is off the charts now. And Trump's solution to this mess? Fire people? Just fire everyone he suspects of disloyalty. According to multiple reports, he's been systematically removing high-ranking military officers who he thinks are part of what he calls the resistance inside the Pentagon. Officers with 30, 35, 40 years of service are being forced into retirement or outright fired because Trump doesn't trust them. Now, let's be real for a second. Trump has always had this obsession with loyalty. Like, it's not a secret. He said it openly, repeatedly. He wants people around him who will do what he says without question. And in business, yeah, maybe that works. You can run your company however you want. But the military, that's different. The military has its own culture, its own chain of command, its own traditions that go back centuries. You can't just come in and treat it like a reality TV show where you fire people for ratings. But that's kind of what's happening. And the military brass, they're not happy about it. That's why you had that awkward silence at the gathering. That's why sources inside the Pentagon are leaking to the press. That's why retired generals are going on CNN and MSNBC and saying things they would never normally say publicly. because they're watching the institution they dedicated their lives to being treated like a prop in Trump's political drama. And here's the thing that most people don't fully grasp. This isn't just about Trump versus the military. This is about a fundamental question of how civilian control of the military is supposed to work in a democracy. Yeah, the president is the commander in chief. Yeah, he gets to make the final calls on military policy, but there's supposed to be a process. There's supposed to be consultation with military leaders who actually understand combat, who understand logistics, who understand the real world consequences of military decisions. When you cut those people out, when you surround yourself only with yes men who will tell you what you want to hear, you make bad decisions, catastrophically bad decisions. And we've seen this movie before, haven't we? Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. How many times do we have to learn this lesson? NPR's reporting on the signal leak highlighted something really important that got lost in all the drama. They talked to military experts who explained that the double standard here is absolutely glaring. Like there's no ambiguity about it. If an active duty captain or major had been part of a group chat that leaked classified info about Yemen operations, they would be in serious legal trouble right now. Career over. Possibly facing prison time. But because this involves the defense secretary and other high-level officials, suddenly it's just a security lapse that gets handled internally with a stern talking to. Can you believe this? The people who are supposed to set the example, who are supposed to maintain the highest standards of security and professionalism, are getting away with stuff that would destroy the career of any lower-ranking service member. And military personnel see this. They're not stupid. They know there's one set of rules for them and a different set of rules for the political appointees at the top. And this is happening at the same time Trump is pushing his agenda to eliminate diversity programs in the military, to roll back policies he sees as too woke, to reshape the military in his image. Now look, reasonable people can disagree about diversity initiatives, but the way Trump is going about it, the firings, the public attacks on military leaders who don't agree with him, is creating chaos. It's creating an environment where military leaders are afraid to speak up, afraid to give honest assessments, because they might be the next one fired and publicly humiliated. The BBC covered this whole situation and interviewed people inside the Pentagon, and the picture they paint is pretty bleak. Morale is low, trust is broken, people are looking over their shoulders constantly, and this is the institution that's supposed to defend the country. This is the organization that needs to be ready to respond to threats at a moment's notice, but instead it's caught up in internal political warfare. And the timing, oh man, the timing makes all of this so much worse, because while all this drama is unfolding, we've got actual real-world crises happening. The government is shut down, the longest shutdown on record. There are elections happening right now that could reshape Congress. International allies are watching all of this and wondering if America is a reliable partner anymore. And instead of projecting strength and stability, we're projecting chaos and dysfunction. This is what happens when you treat governing like a reality show. This is what happens when loyalty trumps competence. This is what happens when you surround yourself with people who are too scared to tell you the truth. In military families, the people who have sons and daughters and spouses in uniform, they're watching all of this and asking themselves, is this who we want making life and death decisions about our loved ones? You know what's really messed up about all this? The military is supposed to be the one institution that stays out of politics. That's literally the whole point of civilian control. The military doesn't pick sides. The military serves whoever the American people elect as president. But Trump is forcing military leaders into impossible positions. Either they go along with policies they think are dangerous or misguided, or they speak up and risk being fired and labeled as part of some deep state conspiracy. And when you create that kind of environment, when you politicize the military to that degree, you weaken the institution. You make it less effective. You undermine the trust that's essential for the chain of command to function properly, because military leadership isn't just about giving orders. It's about trust. Soldiers need to trust that their leaders are making decisions based on what's best for the mission and for their safety, not based on political calculations or personal loyalty to the president. But right now, that trust is eroding. And once you lose that trust, it's incredibly hard to get it back. All right, so let's break this down into the core pieces, because there's a lot happening here and it all connects in ways that are pretty disturbing when you really think about it. First, the signal chat leak. This is huge, and not just because classified information got out. It's huge because it exposes how careless the security protocols are at the highest levels of government. Think about it. These are the people with access to the most sensitive intelligence in the world, nuclear codes, troop movements, covert operations, and they're discussing military operations in Yemen on a group chat app. Like, come on. This isn't some low-level staffer making a rookie mistake. This is the defense secretary and his team. And when you compare how this got handled versus how leaks from lower ranking personnel get handled, the contrast is stark. Reality Winner leaked one document about Russian interference in elections and got 5 years in prison. Chelsea Manning leaked classified cables and spent years in military prison. Edward Snowden had to flee the country and is still in exile. But Pete Hegseth admits to being part of a group chat that leaked classified military operational details, and he gets yelled at by Trump. That's it. He still has his job. He's still running the Pentagon. Military veterans are rightfully pissed about this because they know that if they did even a fraction of what happened here, their careers would be over. They'd be facing court-martial. They'd be disgraced. But there's apparently a different standard for political appointees, and that breeds resentment. That breeds cynicism. That makes people question whether the rules actually matter or if they only matter when it's convenient. The message this sends to the rank and file is terrible. It's basically saying, yeah, there are rules about classified information, but they only apply to you little people. If you're politically connected, if you're one of Trump's guys, you get a pass. How is that supposed to maintain discipline? How is that supposed to maintain standards? Second point, Trump's response to all this tells you everything about his priorities. Instead of focusing on fixing the security problems, instead of implementing better protocols to prevent future leaks, he went after the people he thinks are disloyal. He started firing military officers. He started ranting about sabotage. He made it all about him and his agenda instead of about national security. And look, Trump has a point that leaks are a problem. They were a problem in his first term. They're a problem now. Unauthorized leaks of classified information are serious. They can endanger operations. They can get people killed. They can compromise intelligence sources. Nobody disputes that. But his solution is to fire everyone he suspects of disloyalty instead of actually addressing the root causes. And when you create an environment where people are terrified of being fired for disagreeing with you, you create an environment where nobody tells you the truth. Nobody gives you bad news. Nobody pushes back on bad ideas. And that's dangerous. Military leaders are supposed to give the president their honest assessment. That's their job. That's literally what they're there for. If the president wants to do something militarily that they think is a bad idea, they're supposed to say so. They're supposed to explain the risks, the downsides, the potential consequences, and then the president makes the final call. That's how civilian control of the military is supposed to work. It's not a dictatorship where the president just barks orders and everyone jumps. It's supposed to be a deliberative process where expertise and experience inform decision making. But when you fire people for not being loyal enough, when you only want to hear yes sir instead of honest advice, you end up making decisions in a vacuum. And historically, that leads to disaster. That's how you get bad intelligence assessments. That's how you get military operations that go sideways. That's how you get into wars that drag on for decades because nobody wanted to tell the president the truth. Third, that gathering with the military leaders, those images of generals and admirals standing in silence, looking uncomfortable. That's not normal. That's not protocol. When the commander-in-chief addresses military leaders, there's usually respect shown, even if people privately disagree with policies. The fact that it was so visibly awkward, the fact that Reuters described them as looking ashamed and stunned, that tells you something has fundamentally broken down in the relationship between Trump and the military leadership. And those videos went viral for a reason. Because Americans, especially military families, see those images and they recognize that something is wrong. These are people with decades of service, people who have commanded troops in combat, people who have dedicated their entire adult lives to the military, and they look miserable. They look like they're being held hostage at a really awkward family dinner where everyone's pretending everything is fine, but it's obviously not. That matters because public perception matters. The military's authority, its effectiveness, is partly based on public trust. When people see military leaders looking defeated and humiliated by their own commander-in-chief, it undermines that trust. It makes people question whether the military is being used appropriately or whether it's just another prop in political theater. And that's corrosive. That weakens the institution over time. Military leaders are human. They have opinions, they have political beliefs, but they're supposed to keep that separate from their professional duties. They're supposed to serve whoever is president, regardless of party, regardless of personal feelings, but Trump is making that impossible. He's demanding not just professional service, but personal loyalty. And there's a difference. Fourth and finally, the timing of all this makes it exponentially worse. We're in the middle of a government shutdown, elections are happening, international crises are brewing. This is when you need stability. This is when you need the government to function smoothly. Instead, we've got the president at war with his own defense secretary, military leaders openly expressing frustration, and security protocols that are apparently held together with hope and prayer. CNN's coverage of this whole situation connects it to the larger political moment. Trump's trying to push through major policy changes. He's dealing with court battles. He's managing a divided Congress. And on top of all that, he's got this mess at the Pentagon. It's too much. It's unsustainable. Something's got to give. And when things break under this kind of pressure, they tend to break in unpredictable and dangerous ways. And voters are watching. Military families, who have traditionally been a reliable Republican voting bloc, are watching this chaos and asking questions. Are their loved ones in good hands? Is the commander-in-chief making sound decisions? Is the Pentagon functional? These are not abstract political questions for them. These are personal. These affect their daily lives and their sense of security. Independents who might have been willing to give Trump another chance are seeing dysfunction and incompetence. They're seeing a president who can't even manage his own defense secretary without it turning into a public spectacle. They're seeing classified information being handled carelessly. They're seeing military leaders who clearly have lost confidence in civilian leadership, and that's not a good look heading into elections. Even some Republicans are quietly expressing concerns about whether this is really the leadership style they want. Yeah, they might agree with Trump on policy. They might like his approach to certain issues, but watching the Pentagon descend into chaos, watching military leaders stand in uncomfortable silence, watching security protocols fail so spectacularly, that gives even Trump supporters pause. So where does this go from here? Honestly, it's hard to say. Trump could fire Hegseth. That would probably satisfy some of the critics who say the defense secretary has lost credibility after the Signal chat leak. But it would also be an admission that Trump's judgment was wrong in picking him in the first place. And Trump hates admitting he was wrong about anything. He could double down and keep Hegseth, which is probably the more likely scenario. Trump tends to stick with people once he's committed to them, at least until they become too much of a political liability. And Hegseth is still loyal, which counts for a lot in Trump's world. He could continue purging military leaders until he's surrounded entirely by yes men. This seems to be the direction things are heading. But the problem with that approach is that it leaves you with a leadership team that's not actually competent. They might be loyal, but that doesn't mean they know how to run complex military operations or manage a crisis effectively. Or, and this seems unlikely but theoretically possible, he could actually step back and try to fix the underlying problems. He could implement better security protocols. He could rebuild trust with military leaders. He could create an environment where people feel safe giving honest advice. But based on everything we've seen, based on Trump's entire history and pattern of behavior, that's not his style. The most likely outcome is more chaos, more firings, more leaks, more drama, because that's how he operates. That's what he knows. Trump thrives on chaos. He likes keeping people off balance. He likes being unpredictable, but you can't run the military that way. The military needs stability, clear chains of command, and trust up and down the ranks. And the military, the institution that's supposed to be above politics, that's supposed to be focused solely on defending the country, is getting dragged deeper and deeper into this political mess. That's bad for the military. That's bad for national security. And ultimately, that's bad for all of us, because at the end of the day, we need a functional military. We need military leaders who feel empowered to give honest advice. We need security protocols that actually work. And we need a commander-in-chief who understands that loyalty is earned, not demanded. Leadership is about inspiring people to follow you because they believe in your judgment and your decisions, not because they're afraid of being fired if they disagree. Whether we're going to get any of that anytime soon, well, your guess is as good as mine. But if the last few weeks are any indication, we're in for a bumpy ride. And the generals and admirals standing in that room in uncomfortable silence, they know it too. They're just not allowed to say it out loud, at least not yet. But the fact that they're speaking out now, even carefully, even indirectly, that should tell you something. When the military brass breaks their silence, when they stop following protocol and start expressing concerns publicly, that's a warning sign. That's them saying this isn't normal, this isn't okay, and people need to know about it. Stay tuned, because something tells me this story is far from over. And when the next shoe drops, and trust me it will, we'll be here to break it down for you. This is the kind of thing that doesn't just go away, it festers, it builds, and eventually something gives.